Hello, Internet. So I recently moved, and I have yet to figure out a good setup for my green screen at my new place. I've done some work for the sound quality. I got like a little wraparound sound canceling foam thing for my microphone, and I also just literally hung a comforter on the wall in front of my computer to help with the echo. Still not perfect, still working on it, but it seems to be a lot better than it had been. Anyways, all of that is to say, I'm going to be a disembodied voice for this video. Defense of the Ancients, or Dota, started as a user-created custom game mode on Warcraft 3 back in 2003. It eventually became even more popular than the base game itself and spun off into its own game, Dota 2, in 2013. I started playing Dota in middle school on a computer that ran Windows 2000 with dial-up internet, which was actually quite frustrating because it meant that whenever I was online, which was usually for several hours at a time, no one else could use the phone, so I had to play really late at night when we weren't expecting any calls. Also, the lag was atrocious. I played Dota all through high school, and when I graduated, I kept playing off and on until I was about 26. My Dota 2 account has over 1,000 hours of playtime, and I probably logged close to another 1,000 on Dota 1 before that. I figure, as a general rule, anything I've spent 2,000 hours doing is probably worth spending a little bit of time reflecting on. So, this is my Dota retrospective analysis. I'm going to start by going over some basic gameplay mechanics and roles to provide some background information for folks who aren't familiar with the game. If you already know how the game works, you can feel free to skip ahead to... I don't have the timestamp in front of me, but whenever it looks like I'm done talking about that stuff. Basic gameplay mechanics. Dota is a 5v5 multiplayer online battle arena, or MOBA, style game, much in the same vein as Pokemon Unite or League of Legends. The goal is to invade your opponent's base and destroy the ancient structure at the center. In order to do this, you have to destroy all of the towers in at least one of the 3 lanes. When a tower is destroyed, the next tower in that lane becomes vulnerable to attack. The game starts with a draft, where players take turns picking the heroes that they'll be playing as this game. Once you're in the game proper, you buy some starting items, and then head to one of the 3 lanes, where waves of creeps spawn and crash into one another. Over the course of the game, your heroes level up from level 1 to level 25, learning special abilities and buying items to enhance your character along the way. Some of these have a passive effect, like increasing the attack damage of heroes around you. Others have active abilities that require mana and have effects like stunning an opponent or healing a teammate. In order to level up and learn these moves, you need to be nearby when opposing heroes or creeps die. If you're the one who kills an opposing hero or creep, you also get a gold bonus, which you can spend on items that further enhance your hero at the shop. Usually the first few minutes of the game are spent gathering experience and gold in the 3 respective lanes, where waves of creeps crash into one another and towers attack opposing units if they get too close. After these first few minutes, players tend to roam around more often and fight as a team, trying to kill as many opposing heroes as possible and destroy their towers. As one team gains an advantage, they push into the opponent's base, destroy their barracks, and eventually destroy the Ancient at the center of their base and win the game. Teamwork and roles. So there's 100 different heroes in the game, but each player on your team is typically trying to fulfill one of 5 kind of primary roles called positions. Note that this isn't a hard and fast rule, these kind of blur into each other sometimes. Positions are ranked from 1 to 5 based on how much of the team's experience and gold you will likely be accumulating in this position. Position 1, the carry. Everyone wants to be the carry. As the carry, your job is to carry your team to victory in the late game. You usually spend your time in a very defensible position and try to avoid engaging with the opposing heroes as much as possible in the early game, instead focusing on killing creeps for experience and gold. Carries tend to start slow, but scale very well into the late game. Towards the end of the game, it's not uncommon for your carry to be stronger than 2 or 3 of the opposing heroes combined. Position 2, Mid. Mid laning is often taken on by some of the more experienced players on the team, as it requires monitoring your surroundings from both sides for potential sneak attacks, while facing down an opponent in a 1v1 battle, where you are simultaneously trying to push your opponent out of experience range, get the last hit on every creep, including your own. This is known as denying, because it denies the opponent gold and experience, and having to monitor the special power-up runes that spawn on either side of the mid lane, which can give you a temporary advantage, like doubling your damage for a short time. Mid laners tend to end up with a lot of experience and gold, and often serve as sort of a secondary carry in the late game.
Hey, Editing Flora here. Just letting you know that I am sick of sifting through hours upon hours upon hours of Dota footage to find things that match what I'm saying, and I'm guessing that y'all probably don't care all that much about this, so I don't know why I'm doing it to myself. I have, multiple other videos that are completely written and all ready to film, and this one thing is becoming a really big bottleneck for my channel. So instead, I am just gonna put on generic footage of one of the international Dota tournaments, and it's not gonna match the things that I'm saying. And we're just gonna live with that. So enjoy the rest of the video.
Position 3, Offlane. Offlaners are put in the difficult situation of facing down sometimes as many as 3 heroes in a lane where extending too far out makes you vulnerable to attacks from behind. So, as a result, offlaners are usually the tanks of the team, opting for builds that prioritize defensive capabilities and being on the front line. In the late game, they often try to buy items that make them hard to ignore, like things that give the entire team some kind of bonus. Position 4, Roaming Support and Initiator. In the early game, roaming supports try to be a thorn in the side of the opposing team, often by sneaking up behind people for surprise attacks. In the late game, Position 4 players usually take on the role of initiators in team fights, meaning they put themselves in the precarious position of jumping into a large group of opposing heroes and stunning them, trying to give your team time to set up combos. Playing the initiator in a team fight is a bit like playing cymbals in a band. You might not have that many things to do, but boy, if you mess up the timing, the whole thing falls apart. Position 5, Support. Support's role is to do all the behind-the-scenes work that helps keep your team functioning. Supports often have some kind of healing ability or can provide your teammates with a buff that make them stronger. Early game, they tend to kind of babysit the carry and lane and keep them safe, as well as using a technique called creep pulling, where you can trick neutral creeps into fighting your team's creeps, shifting the equilibrium of where the creeps crash into one another and denying your opponent's experience and gold. Later on, in team fights, it's your primary job to keep the carry alive, sometimes even at the cost of your own life. As a support, vision is also a key component of the game. Wards are items that are invisible to opponents, but can allow you to see areas of the map that would normally be hidden from you, and being able to see an opponent coming is often the difference between life and death. Some heroes can be played in a number of different roles. For example, Kunkka can be played in positions 1, 2, 3, or 4. Others are basically always filling a particular role. Like, you can try to carry with Crystal Maiden if you want, but it's probably not going to go very well for you. I'm sure this will come as a shock to viewers of my channel, but Position 5 was always my favorite. I loved all the nuance that went into warding and supporting your team, and sometimes you'd place wards in the opponent's jungle to try to catch them fighting neutral creeps and could set up sneak attacks, or you could place them in your own jungle to warn your teammates of incoming heroes, or you could place them by runes to try to beat opponents to them, or behind an enemy tower when you were pushing so that you could see if anyone was teleporting to come defend it, or even block the spawn point of neutral creeps and therefore removing the opposing team's ability to pull them. And that's not even getting into sentry wards, which grant your team vision of invisible heroes in opposing wards. Sentry wards give this great counterplay where you have to try to figure out where opponents have wards and place a sentry there to destroy it, but it's a bit of a gamble because sentry wards cost money to place, so you can't just place them around willy-nilly. If you paid really close attention to the enemy team, sometimes you could make inferences about where their wards are based on how they move. Like, if you're starting to sneak up on them from an area that should be out of the opponent's vision, and all of a sudden they start playing defensively, that might be a sign that they have a ward nearby, so you can place a sentry and try to destroy it. Placing wards up on the high ground could give you a huge area of unobstructed vision, but it's a bit obvious, so that's usually the first place people look when they go to place sentries. So it created this really interesting tension where, like, you want to place your wards in useful spots that provide a lot of vision and give your team information about what the opponent is doing, but you don't want to put them in spots that are too obvious because then they'll get dewarded. Ugh, I loved it. Okay, that's probably enough background for folks to, like, follow the video and understand what the game is. And thank you for indulging me on my tangent about warding. I mean, not that, like, you had much of a choice. I mean, I guess you could have skipped it. I don't know if you skipped it or not. That I just realized that I have no way of knowing whether you did, in fact, indulge me on that or not. So, yeah. Conflict and masculinity. Okay, now we're getting to the juicy stuff. So, virtually all online gaming has some amount of harassment baked into it. But from my experience, MOBAs like Dota and League of Legends seem to be on, like, a whole different level. I mean, Dota is it's like the 4chan of the video game world. It's like Dota is like a petri dish for conflict. Like, you've got, like, the ideal incubation conditions all set up. What if we put a bunch of strangers in a digital room for an hour, forced them to work together, then rewarded the winning team while punishing the losers, and imposed consequences for leaving before the time was up? Feels like I'm writing a grant proposal for a sociology experiment. One of the central mechanics in Dota is that when you kill enemy heroes, you get stronger. It'd be like if you were to play a game of basketball, but every time a player scores, they get an inch taller. So given that mechanic and the average game length of about 40 minutes, mistakes can really snowball, especially because when players get upset, they tend to get tilted and then make even more mistakes. And given that you are usually playing with strangers on the internet, tensions tend to run a little bit high sometimes.
Yo, save me! Ult me! Ult me! Ult me! Ult me! What are you doing, you fucking animal? You have ult the whole time! Are you retarded? Are you retarded? Why are you laughing, you fucking retard? You have ult the whole time! We actually just win the game if you ult me, you stupid fucking animal! Why are you laughing, you stupid fucking dog? Why the fuck are you laughing, you dumb toad? I'd fucking spit in your mouth, you fucking piece of shit.
So losing is often a pretty miserable experience. And, like, right off the bat, we can see that when you tie your happiness to winning in a system that pairs you with people at your skill level, you're only going to be having fun about half the time. But that intermittent positive reinforcement can be really addictive. I mean, I remember times when I finished a game just, like, absolutely fuming, yelling at my computer screen, and the second the game ended, I just jumped right back into the queue. And in a way, this anger kind of turns Dota into like a zero-sum game for happiness. If the opposing team becomes tilted and upset about how the game is going, they're going to make more mistakes, which increases your chance of winning. So the more miserable your opponents are, the better it is for you. And if you're playing with like a single-minded focus on winning, like many of the player base does, there's actually a strategic component to upsetting the other team. You're literally incentivized to incite conflict. And that's just the fighting that happens across team lines. The infighting is so much worse. In a team game like Dota, there's always someone else to blame for why you're losing, so people preserve their images of themselves as good players by throwing their teammates under the bus. Often very vocally, to both teams, because it's important to them that everyone knows it's not their fault that they're losing. The ironic part is that typing in all chat that your teammates suck actively harms your team's chances of winning, as it's likely to tilt them and lead them to make even more mistakes. But they're willing to do that because as long as they have someone else to blame for their loss, it doesn't threaten their identity as a good player, and therefore it makes the loss more palatable. And this tendency towards anger at mistakes is heightened by the incredible complexity of the game. At time of recording, there are 122 unique heroes, each with 4 abilities, and each hero can carry up to 10 out of 208 unique items, many of which give the hero even more activated abilities. So, using a game summary for what I would consider to be a pretty average game from my Dota buff profile, I counted 69 unique abilities in play. Nice. And this is all further complicated by the dozens upon dozens of cosmetic accessories that you can buy for your heroes with real money, so sometimes it's difficult to tell which hero is which. And if you don't know the moves or playstyle of the opposing heroes, you'll usually find out by them killing you. Die enough, and your teammates will accuse you of feeding, or dying on purpose to help the other team. And people will literally use the in-game behavior reporting system to try to get you banned for not being good enough at the game. What a friendly and welcoming environment. Speaking of the ban system, the basic idea is that there should be ways of stopping people from ruining the game for everyone. But what it looks like to ruin the game for everyone is going to be influenced on who makes up everyone. According to a survey of over 7,000 players done by Into the Breach Esports in February 2021, the player base is 93.5% men. But hey, on the bright side, that's down from 95.8% in 2016, so at this rate, we'll have proportionate gender representation by 2117. Given these player demographics, it shouldn't come as a surprise that the culture surrounding the game is largely shaped by masculine ideals like being tough and seeking dominance. Among most of the entrenched Dota players I've met, there's this sort of thick-skin mentality where you just have to accept a certain level of harassment as part of the deal if you want to play. And the ban system reflects this culture. Harassment, up to and including telling your teammates to kill themselves, is treated as a relatively minor infraction, while the sanctity of the match is treated with the utmost importance. So for example, artificially boosting your matchmaking score to allow you to play above your skill level will result in a year-long ban on your account, while yelling racist, ableist, or homophobic slurs at your team will get you a slap on the wrist and a warning. This creates kind of a feedback loop where women and gender-diverse folk and people with other marginalized identities avoid the game, which in turn makes the environment even less welcoming. And I think this contributes to an attitude I've seen from many players of a centralized masculine superiority. People look at the fact that the competitive scene is virtually 100% male-dominated and conclude that, I guess men are just better at Dota as a matter of biology. But social and cultural factors can have a huge influence on the skills that people are likely to develop. Like, the reason there are so few black swimmers in the Olympics isn't because black people are just naturally worse at swimming. It's because they were systematically excluded from pools for decades. Not to mention the ongoing economic aspect of pool memberships often being prohibitively expensive, which disproportionately affects black people.
Hierarchy, identity, and monetization.
Dota uses a matchmaking ranking, or MMR, system for determining who you will play against. This means that you will be placed in matches with players of approximately your skill level, and will gain or lose MMR based on wins and losses. There's also a more visible ranking system that's tied to your MMR, where you advance from Herald to Immortal for some kind of seasonal rewards. Much has already been said about seasonal rewards and loot boxes as a way of keeping people playing and paying, but there's one aspect of this that I'd really like to highlight here, and that is identity. Because Dota is such a harsh environment for newcomers, over 90% of players sampled in that demographic study I was talking about earlier had been playing for at least 3 years, Much of the player base is heavily invested in the game and puts a high priority on their rank. I mean, I remember I used to obsess over mine, thinking that if I could only make it to Crusader, if I could only make it to Archon, if I could only make it to Legend, I'd be happy. This is, of course, silly, because there's no stability in the joy that comes from ranking up. A few bad games and you're right back down to your previous rank. And in competitive gaming, there's often a sense of shame that comes from losing to someone you consider to be worse than you. It kind of subtly implies that you don't deserve your place in the gaming hierarchy. An example of this in action can be seen on the Magic the Gathering podcast Limited Resources. Right before a new set comes out, hosts Marshall and Luis do a retrospective look at the previous set and give kind of like paper plate style awards to cards they found particularly noteworthy. One of the awards they give each set is the "My opponent played this, so now I must win or quit Magic forever" award. Wordy, I know. And I get that this award is a joke, but it's a joke that only works if people can relate to the feeling of having their identity as a Magic player threatened by losing to a player they consider to be worse than them. So competitive gaming often ends up functioning as sort of a proving ground to demonstrate one's intelligence and superiority. With this framing, it's easy to see why gamers rail so hard against lesbian walking simulators. Games like Gone Home represent a shift in what video games can be that's moving away from competitions to prove dominance. And in a world that's told them that being the best is paramount, a shifting cultural landscape of gaming threatens to topple their understanding of themselves as intelligent and capable people. Anyways, getting back to Dota, players tying their identity as human beings to their position in gaming hierarchies is great for business. In fact, this is kind of like the central part of Valve's business model here. Dota 2 is free to play, and the main way it's monetized is through in-game cosmetic items. They're banking on people who live, eat, and breathe Dota, spending hundreds of dollars on cosmetic items as a form of self-expression or as a status symbol. AI. A few years ago, Dota 2 OpenAI was making headlines by beating the best teams in the world at the International Dota 2 tournament. Now, AI defeating humans in games is not a particularly new phenomenon. Computers have been able to beat the best chess players in the world for about 25 years now. The interesting parts are that A, Dota is much more dynamic, with orders of magnitude more possible game states than chess, and B, it's a team game. To me, this represents incredible potential. Having multiple AI-controlled units that work together, adapting to novel circumstances to perform different complex roles in service of a greater overall goal? That's wild to me. What if we were able to employ AI like this in the service of meeting humanity's needs? Could technology like this be harnessed to maintain supply chains and make sure that everyone has access to food and medicine? What about to provide aid in the aftermath of a natural disaster? There's so many applications. Where I feel concerned, though, is how the context of the game is basically developing more and more advanced AI for combat purposes. We're teaching AI to get better at working together to kill and destroy things. Digital things. For now. But I still feel a bit alarmed when I think about this. Because the military is used to maintain the global network of capitalist inequality, and these power structures have a vested interest in self-preservation, they can throw money at projects in ways that those trying to feed or house people could never dream of. So even when people don't set out to help the military, it's very common for work to be co-opted by the military-industrial complex and used for war. Here's a clip from Thought Slime's video, "Is Bill Gates a Good Billionaire?" where she explains how this process played out for Microsoft's HoloLens technology.
Remember the HoloLens? The cool-looking tech demo where you could play Minecraft on your table? Well, Microsoft signed a $480 million contract to put that type of augmented reality into the hands of the United States military so they could use it to blow stuff up like they like to do. According to The Guardian, many of the engineers who worked on building the technology believed it would be used to help architects and engineers build buildings and cars, to help teach people how to perform surgery or play the piano, to push the boundaries of gaming, and connect with the Mars rover, RIP. Under the terms of the Army contract, however, the devices will be used to, quote, increase lethality by enhancing the ability to detect, decide, and engage before the enemy.
So, while I'm blown away by the technological feat that is Dota 2's OpenAI, I'm also a bit apprehensive about the potential applications for violent suppression that it represents. Positives. Okay, so I've got a lot of criticisms of the game, but what did I like about Dota? I mean, I played thousands of hours of it, so clearly there must have been some parts that grabbed me. Variety of gameplay. One of the things that kept me playing for so long was how every game would play out a little bit differently than each other. Some games would end in 20 minutes after a decisive team fight and a quick push. Others would go on for hours, every hero having maxed out their skills and item slots and all of the barracks being destroyed. And there were a handful of heroes that, if picked, represented a significant change in how the game would play out for everyone. Like, if someone was playing techies, you never knew if you were standing on top of a remote mine that could detonate at any second, so you had to buy dozens of sentry wards and communicate with your team to share information on which areas you thought were safe or dangerous based on where techies had been last seen. Meat hook. Most spells in the game have targeted casting. You click on the intended target, and it does the effect. There were a handful of moves, though, known as Skillshots, that could miss if you got the timing or angle off, the trade-off being that when they do hit, they're extra powerful. This risk-reward mechanic made landing one so satisfying. The most popular skill shot in the game is Pudge's Meat Hook. Hook travels in a straight line and grabs the first target it hits, hero or creep, pulling them towards you. It had a massive range and could be used to pull an opponent into an ambush, but it could also be used to pull an ally to safety. Sometimes you could even guess where a player would be a couple seconds after you lost sight of them, and landing a hook in the dark was such a thrill. Oh my gosh. Just the existence of Pudge in a game puts the whole opposing team on edge, forcing them to mind their angles and position themselves near creeps, never sure if they're about to die at any given moment. In fact, this one spell was so beloved by players that it actually spawned its own entire spin-off game, Pudge Wars, where everyone is Pudge and they all just have one spell, Meat Hook, and they just try to hook each other. That's the whole game. Drafting. The process of picking your heroes was probably my favorite part of the whole game. There's this sort of rock, paper, scissors element to the hero matchups, where some heroes are particularly good against other ones, so you're trying to build this, cohesive game plan, but if you show your hand too early in the draft, the other team can counter your strategy, so you're trying to, pick open-ended heroes that can go in sort of multiple different directions and make adjustments on the fly to whatever your opponents are doing. And I don't know, there's just this sense of infinite possibility when you're picking your heroes, where I often find myself kind of visualizing how can these all work together to create something that's greater than the sum of their parts. It's really fun. Deep mechanics. I love a game that I can really sink my teeth into. Something about the iterative process of develop a new skill and then learn how to apply it strategically in a game is just really satisfying to my brain. This is the same reason why I love Rocket League, Smash Bros, and Mario Odyssey as well. They're all fast-paced games with virtually limitless skill ceilings, so there's this feeling that there's always something more to learn, and I just love that. Teamwork. I loved the challenge of navigating the dynamic needs of my team when playing support. Placing a ward that tips off a teammate that the enemy is coming for them always felt so satisfying. And that rush of excitement when you see that a teammate is in trouble and you teleport to their lane and save them, oh my gosh, amazing. Plus, I saw part of my role as support to be supporting the players themselves, not just the heroes they controlled in the game.
That means offering reassurance and emotional support to people when they died, and providing new players with a warm, patient presence as they learn the ropes.
Gay!
Juggling Objectives.
While the ultimate goal of the game is to destroy your opponent's towers and they're ancient, there were many different ways of going about that. You could destroy enemy towers quickly to gain control of the map, or group up with your teammates for big surprise attacks where you outnumber your enemies, or you could play defensively and evasively, trusting that your heroes scale into the late game better than theirs. Having several different objectives to be mindful of at all times kind of forces you to be constantly evaluating, what is the most important thing for me to be doing right now? Is it more important to defend my top tower from attack by the other team, or would I rather use this opportunity to counterpush one of their towers? What about in the late game? Do you fight the giant dragon Roshan in the middle of the map to give your carry an item that acts as an extra life, or is the risk of being ambushed there too high? Early on, should you leave the lane to go set up wards and ambush an opposing player, or is it more important to pull creeps so the lane doesn't push out too far? You're faced with hundreds of these decisions every game, and as you get more experience, you learn what you should be prioritizing at any given time, and I don't know, it was just so cool learning how to sort of like zoom out and view the trajectory of the game from a kind of broader perspective and try to work out like how do my actions contribute to my team's overall plan for how this game is going to play out.
Conclusion.
I just want to make this clear. If you love Dota, I'm not trying to take it from you. You can have your Angry Man game. I don't want to cancel Dota. I want to identify the things that made me fall in love with the game in the first place and think about how those aspects could be translated into other contexts in the future. And if you're watching this video, seething to yourself about the trans lady on the internet criticizing your favorite video game, please know that I am a very sensitive special snowflake, and if you're mean to me, I will cry. In all seriousness though, I think it's often easy to become alienated from the effects of our words in this digital age when we don't have to witness the pain that they cause, so I would just ask that you be mindful in considering how your comments might land for this soft little marshmallow bitch. And I'm aware that this alienation goes both ways. Like, this is something I want to touch on more in a future video, but I don't get to look my audience in the eyes while they're watching this video, so I don't know how this stuff is landing for people. Like, if I were talking one-on-one with someone who is angry at me for how I talk about gaming hierarchies, I probably would have read their body language at some point and switched gears from an analytical angle, opting for more of an empathetic connection to try to listen to what's important to that person in the moment. Like, even if I don't agree with the conclusions that someone else draws, I still care about their feelings. And I don't know, I feel sad that the limitations of the medium don't really allow us to connect with that or to explore that in a more satisfying way. Okay, I should probably wrap up now because this is very quickly becoming a video about the limitations of social media, which seems to be what my channel is about more than anything these days. So let's keep it on track here. This video was about Dota. If you liked this video and want to support me in my ability to keep paying rent and, you know, sometimes making videos or something, you can do that over at patreon.com/florasplace. Big thank you to all the folks supporting me on Patreon. As some of you know, I recently moved to Chicago, and money is a bit tight, and the job I landed here isn't really enough to cover my expenses on its own, so your support really is making a big difference for me. And after living at my parents' place for so long, being able to surround myself with my little queer polyamorous community in the city has been a breath of fresh air. So thank you for everyone who helped make this possible for me. If you liked this video but are not in a position to support me financially, you can still like, comment, and subscribe to gain the favor of the algorithm. Until next time, take care.